Okay.
If you can hear me, folks, which I presume you can, you should be seeing a video of Pani, but we're just waiting for the numbers of participants to settle, so we know most people are here. If you have a look on chat, because you're able to talk to each other, we have put a GoFundMe on there, which is for Pani. So if anybody does want to make any form of donation or contribution for his time as the event goes on, just go on that link and do so. No obligation though, it is free for everybody. But if you want to do it, you can. And he might be mentioning the opportunity to have an action from him. If that is the case, obviously the GoFundMe is somewhere where you can just go and say, thank you, and pop something on there. We find it's the best way to go. These people are giving the time freely, but this allows us to give a little bit back if we want to. I'm now going to shut up and hand over to Pani. It's all yours.
Okay. Right, hello everyone. I hope that we're all good and everyone can see and hear me. We're just going to go through a few things now. I thought I'd start off with a little video of some of my work to give you some examples of the kind of thing that I do. And I just got a quick hello from Phil Andrew, which is very nice. Thank you very much for joining. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run a little video. It'll also give a chance for people that may be a little bit late to join in, be able to see a few of the things that I've done in the last couple of years. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'm just going to go and share my screen now with my QuickTime player, share it and play. Hopefully that should be full screen. So there we go. Hopefully that's given you an idea of the kind of thing that I do. What I'd like to do now is go through a seminar that I prepared that helps us to see how we can make the most of the pictures. Now, a lot of times people have got some amazing photos in their hard drives, in their libraries, and they haven't quite got the best out of the images. So what I want to do is see how we can pack a bit more punch into our portraits. So again, I'm going to be sharing the screen and putting up my slideshow. Hopefully this is going to work and you'll be able to see what I'm up to here. There we go. So this was originally prepared to be done at a trade show, and this is how I was going to start. It was, now I'm just going to minimize myself on the screen. There we go. Okay, so I was going to start off by saying I'm going to be very unpopular and saying something I shouldn't be saying in view of the fact there was going to be a lot of trade there. And as it says here, trade shows, if we remember what they are, when social distancing was a thing that was unheard of, most of us went into contact with companies and people trying to sell us things that they think that we believe will make our photography better. So now that we're all stuck indoors, we can think about what we can actually do with the things that we've got, because most probably won't be buying things for a little while. So the example and the analogy that I make is, imagine that we're a car mechanic, just starting our career, we're young, we're inexperienced. What do? We go to trade shows and we go to manufacturers of products, of tools, etc. And they make us believe that having their tools, their equipment, their accessories, their software, their computers are going to make us a better mechanic. So what do? We go out and we buy lots and lots of stuff. But if we follow that line of reasoning, we end up having a garage full of spanners and screwdrivers and pliers and tools and jigs and test equipment that we don't really know how to use for the best effect. Now, who's heard the expression, all the gear and no idea? Well, what do we need to do so that we can get good photos? I can assure you that it's not just by buying more stuff and more gear and more equipment and loads of software. Of course, that can help us, but that's not essential. Although some of those things do help, the most important thing for us to do is understand exactly what it is we're looking at. We need to analyze our photos. What do we mean? We need to give careful consideration to what our subconscious is doing with the input of our eyes. Now, we automatically assume we see something, it's our eyes that are doing the seeing. That isn't actually the case. When we review a picture or a scene, it's not just our eyes that are doing the work. They feed the information to our minds, to our brains, to our intellect, and then we begin to recognize things. Our minds begin to make sense of the things that we're seeing. For example, we know that our eyes actually see the images we see in front of us upside down. It's our brain that puts it the right way around. Now on this, studies have been carried out on the subject from many, many years ago. Now, if you've got a pen and paper handy, make a note. You can read up on this in your own time. I'm just going to scratch the surface. It's research that's been done on how we see things. The principles of grouping, or the Gestalt laws of grouping, are a set of principles in psychology, nothing to do with eyesight, psychology, first proposed by the Gestalt psychologists to account for the observation that humans naturally perceive objects as organized patterns and objects, a principle known as pragnance. Now, it's worth just doing a little bit of research, read it for yourself. It is a bit dull and boring, but it gives us a bit of insight into the way we view our pictures and how we can take our pictures and make them more powerful. So let's go a little bit deeper into this, not a lot. These psychologists argue that these principles exist because the mind has an innate disposition to perceive patterns in the stimulus based on certain rules. Now, what are the rules? They've got 5 main categories. proximity, the distance of one thing to the other, similarity, continuity, closure, and connectedness. Now, if these things exist within a picture, it makes the picture more successful. And again, in the most simplistic terms, when viewing successful photographs, our eyes are guided to the main subject via the different elements within the frame. For example, in a predominantly dark image, our eyes go straight to the brightest part. Now, if we think of the old masters, the paintings that we go to the National Portrait Gallery and various exhibitions up and down the country, or if we just go online and see some of the work of Rembrandt and so many other artists from yesteryear, they're predominantly dark. And the main focus that our eyes see are the brightest part, which is usually the faces. Now, the opposite is also true. In a high key or a very light image, our eyes go to the darkest part, the point of most contrast. And that happens especially when we take high key photos. You know, white background, our eye goes straight to the subject. There's nothing to distract us. Other tools that we can use to guide the eyes of the viewer include vignetting, blurring out the less important elements, using leading lines, careful composition, use of colour, having very few or no distractions. And if you notice that with the pictures that I showed earlier, many of them were actually applying quite a few of those principles. It's not a coincidence, you know, and your pictures will be the same. Pictures that are simpler usually work better. And if you look in competitions, it's usually the simplest pictures that are the most successful. When we've got multiple elements within the frame, we sometimes struggle to realise what the most important part is. That's why busy pictures tend not to work so well. So to create powerful images, we need to understand at least some of the points that we mentioned earlier. Another thing, every picture tells a story. We just have to start determining which parts add to the story of the image and which parts detract from the story. And I've got a couple of pictures later that we can look at, pictures that I took. I'll show you the raw files, and we're going to see how it started off and how it finished up. And hopefully you'll understand that really, really well. The reason that I used the word story earlier is that every image, every photograph that we see is actually telling a story without words, but it is a story nonetheless. It could be happy, sad, loving, dramatic. It could be a good story, or it can be a bad story. Generally speaking, simplicity is the key. However, we all have a problem. And what's that? Our problem is that we are attached to the images that we create. So we need to ask ourselves, do our photos fulfill the following criteria? Does the photo have impact? Does it show creativity and a degree of style? Is it good compositionally? Is the image or print presentation good? Is there a centre of interest within the picture? Is there good lighting? Is there good colour balance? What about the technical aspects of the picture and the photographic techniques we use to get it? Is there storytelling and subject matter? So that's why it's good to bounce ideas off of friends or family regarding the images we make, especially when submitting panels for pictures for panels or for competitions. The reason why we get so attached to our images we create is that we're always looking at the story from our point of view. We were there when the picture was taken. We remember the atmosphere, the surroundings, the smells, the noises. We remember how impressed we were of the scene in front of us. So that's why we've got an emotional attachment with the photo. But somebody else, when they look at exactly the same photo, will see it or read it differently to us. So it's good to detach ourselves from the emotion of a photo and try to look at it more subjectively. And I find the easiest way to do this is to leave the picture for a few days or a few weeks or even a couple of months and then come back to it. This way, the heat of the moment goes away. We may find that the image we were most excited about isn't that great after all? But maybe another image is better. And that's happened to me loads of times. So shall we see some practical examples? I'll start off with a few images and I'll explain the tools I used to create the vision I had in my mind when I took the pictures. The image that we see on the back of the camera should be viewed as the foundation of the image that we want to create and not as the final product. The final product we will come to once we've retouched it or recropped it or done whatever we need to do on our computer afterwards. And this is where we come to the point I mentioned at the beginning. It's not a case of having many tools. It's a matter of knowing which tools to use and when. So unless we make the right decision from the start, unless we know where we want to end up, we're going to fail in getting what we want to get. It's failing our objective. So have you ever wondered, just talking about the tools and the analogy of the mechanic, I'm sure we've all been to mechanics and taken our car and there's rows and rows of spanners and nuts and bolts and all sorts of tools and jacks and machinery in there. And we take the car there and it's not fixed. But then we're going down the motorway and we break down. And an AA man or an RAC man or a green flag man turns up in a transit van with a fraction of the tools that they had in the garage. But what happens? He can fix it in 20 minutes. Why? It's not a case of having the tools, it's a case of knowing which tools he needed to get the car going. It's the same with our photography. When we have an image in front of us, just the fact that we've got various bits of software or various bits and pieces of our studio doesn't mean we have to use it all. We just need the right thing to create the desired effect. So on that note, I think the most valuable tool that we can use in post-production in enhancing our images is dodging and burning. Now, there are many ways of doing this, but I'll explain the method which I use, which I think is best in my personal opinion. Obviously, there's hundreds of different ways of doing dodging and burning, but I think I'll show you the way that I do it, and hopefully you'll see why I use that particular method. I use screen and multiply layers, and I can explain the reason for that in a little bit. Let's see how we can turn a flat grey circle into what looks like a sphere. Okay, so we're going to do that in a second. I'm just going to wrap up this particular portion of the presentation. Think of your photo as a story. What is it saying to those that weren't with us when we took the picture? Does it measure up to the 10 criteria that we mentioned earlier? And just to repeat them, they are impact, creativity and style, composition, the presentation of the image or the print, having a main center of interest, if the lighting's good, as well as the color balance, technically good, good photographic technique, good storytelling and subject matter. Now, you'll probably realize that these are some of the criteria that are used in competitions to work out which are the best pictures. And often judges, panels of judges are always referring to these and asking themselves, well, does this picture tell a story? Is there a center of interest? Is there impact? Is the lighting good? Are the colors correct or is it slightly off? All of these things contribute to making a good picture. And trust me, the simpler, the better. So, are we guiding the eyes of the viewer to where we really want them to go? If we do, we're definitely packing more punch in our portraits. So, that's the end of the slideshow. I'm going to have a slurp of water. And now I will go, hopefully, into Photoshop. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. Just 1 second. QuickTime Player. Desktop. 1 second. Now, hopefully, I'm going to share again. There we go. So, when I mentioned yesterday on the Guild Facebook page, have your laptops ready, this is what I wanted you to do. Have a computer next to you, create a new document, and make a circle. So we'll go onto the marquee tool. You obviously have the option of rectangular or elliptical. I'm going to choose an elliptical marquee tool. So I've just made a document here that is 10 inches by 8 inches and 300 pixels across. Okay, so to do that, just go File, New, and then you've got the option of making something a certain size and so many pixels. RGB color, I actually happen to have it in 16-bit, and I say okay, but I'm going to cancel that because I've got one already. Now, what I do next is I will make a circle here. It doesn't really matter what shape, it can be the shape of an egg or a circle or anything. But what we want to do is make that, put it in the middle of the document. We now want to go to our fill brush, and we want to choose a color. It doesn't really matter what color it is as long as it's a mid-tone. I would choose mid-gray around about 128 on the R, G and B scale. So it's a mid-tone gray. I'll say okay, and I'll fill that up. I'll press Command D to deselect the marching ants. And here we have a flat disk. I'm hoping everyone can see this okay. Now, what you can do is go into Dodge and Burn, which are the tools here. So there's Dodge and Burn. The problem is, when we use these, it can actually overdo things. You can make things too bright or too dark. And if dealing with a color image, it can create color shift, which we don't want. So what I use, if I want to lighten something, I use, as I mentioned in my presentation, a screen and multiply layer. Now, how do I do that? I'll go into the background layer. I'll create a new layer by pressing Command J. I will then turn the blend mode of this layer from normal to lighten. Now, nothing's happening as yet because it's whatever I do to this layer that is going to act to make the image lighter. Now, what I want to do is I want to do another layer. Actually, I'll just go back to normal just for a second. I'll create another layer. So, sorry, I'll press Command J again. Now I've got two layers, layer 1 and layer 2. I'm going to rename this layer and I'm going to call it Lighten. And then I'm going to rename this layer and I'm going to call it Darken. Now, what I do with this first layer is I'm going to do a mask. So I can click on that little symbol down the bottom. Hopefully you can all see it on your screens. It's right down the bottom right-hand corner. And a little box has come up that says Add Layer Mask. Now, if I add a layer mask, I want to invert it, which means instead of becoming a white mask, it becomes a black mask. So I can do that mask and press Command I to invert it. Or alternatively, I can just click on this, on the Japanese flag, the Add Layer Mask symbol, press Alt and click it, and that gives me an inverted mask. And then I go onto the Darken layer, press Alt on the Mac, and then another inverted mask. I then want to change the blend mode of these layers. The Lighten layer, I want to change to Screen. And the Darken layer, I want to turn to Multiply. I then want to take both of these layers, press Shift and click, and then Command G to group them. And I'm going to rename that Lighten and Darken. Now, you're probably all wondering, what on earth is this guy doing? Well, to explain, I'm going to open another document. File, open. Grayscale chart. Okay. So this just shows us a grayscale. If you can see at the top right-hand side of my screen here, I've got the RGB values as I push this over the top here. Now, if you look, I'm in the white area with my crosshairs, and that is reading 255. It's the highest reading you can get. If I go right the way across to the other side, the black area there is 0. So that's going to be jet black, that's going to be pure white. There's no detail in the white, there's no detail in the black. But as we go up each scale, you can see the numbers in the RGB values changing. So from the black it's 0, the next step up is 13, the step after that is 26, the step after that is 38, and we go on up to the very other end where it says 299 in that area, 242 in the one just before the white, and 255 on the white. Now, let's see what happens if we add a layer. I'll just press Command J, and I turn the blend mode of that layer to screen. It's all got a lot lighter, an awful lot lighter. But there is one critical difference to what has happened here in comparison to what happens with most other methods of lightening. Let's put our cursor on the lighter part and the darker part. So the light part, 255, is still 255. If I go to the other end, the black is still black. So I haven't changed the black. But if I go here, 255 is the brightest. The next step down hasn't gone completely white. It's gone to 254, which is very, very bright indeed, but it's not burnt out. And the next one, 252. And the next one, 249, and so on. It keeps going down and down and down until we get to the other end. So that means if I was to hide this layer by doing an inverted mask, so I press Alt and the Japanese flag, add layer mask, and then with a brush, so I press B for brush, and I go over this, and I lighten it, and I have the opacity of my brush at 10%. All I'm doing is I'm applying 10% lightening. But even if I went to 100%, I'm never going to make everything completely burn out. So I can do this, and then I let go and click again, and I brush over it again. And I let go and click again, brush over it again. And every time I let go and brush over it, it's making things lighter, but it's never going to push them so bright that they go out of range. By contrast, if I was to take that away, I'll just make a different layer and then get on my dodge and burn tool, and I press dodge, and I'll have that, just for the sake of speed, I'm going to have it 25%. I'll type in 25. If I now take that brush and go over that, what's happened? Well, let's put our marquee tool, and if I click there, if you look at the RGB value, it's saying 194. But if I come down here, okay, the end bit was always 255, but it's 255 right the way across. It's completely burnt it out. But with this one, if I get rid of, get rid of that layer there, we go back onto the layer that we put on to lighten it. We go on with our brush. Even if I put the opacity of the brush, as I did earlier, to 25%, exactly the same, and I brush over, and I brush over, and I brush over, no matter how many times I do it, I'm never going to go to 255 in every area. Hopefully that's clear. Now, we've applied that. That's fine. I'm going to hide that. If I want to darken things, what do? New layer. This time the blend mode is going to be multiply. All of a sudden, it's got very, very dark. I'm going to press M for marquee to get a crosshair. This very far right side, it's still 255. Okay, so it's still white. But everything else over here, now remember, this particular section here was 0. It's still 0. But the one next to it is 1. Now, that is still very, very dark, but it's not completely jet black. By the same token, the next section along is 3 and 6, and it goes on until we get to the far other end, which is 255. So that means even at maximum adjustment, I haven't completely blocked everything out. I hope that's clear and understood. If you do have questions, please ask them, and I will come back to them a little later. So what we do with this again is press Alt and our Japanese flag, new layer mask, and it makes that that layer invisible, effectively, or the effect of the blending mode invisible, until we brush it in with a white brush. So I press B for brush, we're in a white brush, and if I brush along this side, you can see we're getting darker and darker, but it's never pushing it out of range. Again, in exactly the same fashion I did earlier, if I create a new layer and go to the Dodge and Burn tool over here, and I go to the Burn tool, and I go into the shadows, and I turn the exposure to 25%, exactly as I did with the screen layer, and I go to this side, every time I click it, what's going to happen? It's going to turn everything jet black. So I press M for marquee, I go in here, and it's 0. It's effectively pitch black. I've gone out of range too quickly. And when you have a color image and you go into it so aggressively, it ends up shifting the color. And you get, especially on skin tones, they start going funny shades of orange and yellow, and all weird things start happening. So this is one of the reasons why, certainly for people retouching, for faces, for skin, I never use the Dodge and Burn over here, but I use a screen and multiply layer. So what we've done here is we've created 2 layers, one with a screen blending mode and one with, I beg your pardon, one with a multiply blending mode. So what I can do is if I press Shift and click, I don't know why I'm doing this. Okay, Shift and click, and then I Command G to group them, I can see the effect of what I'm doing straight away. And what I would do here is rename that Lighten for screen, and then Darken for multiply. That way I can lighten and darken things selectively, one step at a time, as I'm going along in my images. I hope that's clear. If we have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them in a little bit. So if we now go, now how can we use this from a practical perspective? Okay. So if we go back to the image that we had earlier, the untitled image, this is how we can make a difference. So I've done exactly that I explained a little earlier. I've got a lighten and a darken. We've got a grey disc that looks flat as a pancake. Again, it looks like a Japanese flag. But I'm going to go into my brush tool, and I'm going to go into my lighten, that little box there, and I'm going to use the brush, a bigger brush. I'm going to make sure it's nice and soft, and I'm going to give some shape to this particular circle. I'm going to make a flat disc, and I'm going to give it some dimensionality. So I am going to lighten certain bits. Now it's on 25%, which is quite aggressive. Generally, I recommend about 10% or thereabouts. Anything between 7 and 10%. And you can vary the size of your brush. So I've made it a bigger brush, and now I'm going to make it smaller and accentuate that a little bit in the middle. And then I'm going to go into the darken, and I'm going to give it a little bit more darkness around the outside here. And I'll possibly add a little bit more lightning here. And all of a sudden, we have got the makings of a sphere as opposed to a disc. I've just lightened it and darkened it one step at a time. And remember, when you're using this method and you're brushing it on to that layer mask, every time you click your mouse button, it's adding 10% of that adjustment. Doesn't matter how long you keep it on there, it's 10%. Then you let go and you re-click, that's an additional 10%. And you keep going over it. So for example, if you're lightening somebody's eyes, if you give 2 or 3 brush strokes on one eye, you give exactly the same amount on the other eye. Then you know that you've lightened both eyes the exact same amount. So let's have a look at that change again. Because I've grouped it, I can turn on the effect of both lighten and darken simultaneously. So that's the flat disc that we had. And that is what we've got afterwards. Now, this principle was used in one of the images you saw in the video earlier. And I'll show you the picture. It's this image here. I'll make it a little bigger. So that picture, it's, as you can see, I use Canon cameras. It's a CR2 file. That is my raw file. That is exactly what came out of my camera. Now, as it happened, the customer saw this. The guy's name is Jermaine. He came in with his family, just a family photo shoot. And obviously I saw the fact that it was built like a brick outhouse. And I said to him, come on, Jermaine, take your top off. Let's take a picture of you. And he goes, no, no, no. I said, go on, you can do it. He said, all right then. So I took the picture, I put it in the preview. I use a software called ProSelect to do my viewings. And you press a button and it turns it black and white and it does something like this. Oh, sorry. Command Shift U, thank you. It does that, flat as a pancake. Now, the lighting was good, the expression was good. For your information, the lighting that I used was what I call, well, it's an expanded 3-point lighting. So 3-point lighting means there's 2 lights behind the subject pointing towards me. And that's what's given us that little bit of light around the edge of his body. I then had 2 lights in front, one main light from above, and then another light underneath where we can see the catch lights in his eyes down here. So that's the light above and that's the light beneath. That bit there I didn't really want, I got rid of it later in post. So Jermaine saw this picture, he didn't like it and he didn't get it. But I played around with it and I used exactly what we talked about, dodging and burning, plus a little bit of contrast and a little bit of sharpening, and I ended up with this. Exactly the same picture. All I did was lighten some bits, darken others, and come up with this. Now this picture won, got me a Photographer of the Year with the Click Group a couple of years ago, but it works. It's simple, no distractions. Your eye goes directly to his face, then you look at his muscles, then you go to his eyes, and then you appreciate the picture. And that's why it works. And the only thing I did to that was dodging and burning, a little bit of sharpening, and a little bit of contrast. And we went from there to there. Hopefully you can see the power of dodging and burning. So just to show you, now what I've actually done, I've created an action so that you don't have to go through the effort of what I just did, create new layers, change the blending mode and inverted masks, etc. So I've created an action, which I have down here, lighten and darken. So I press the button, hey presto, there it is. I've got exactly the same thing that I showed everybody earlier. And what the type of thing that I did was, I would press on the lighten button, B for brush, 10%. And now, a lot of people think, oh, something's a little bit bright, well, let's make it darker. Something's a little bit dark, let's make it brighter. That's not necessarily the case. Here, I want to make the brighter bits even brighter. Yeah, his chest here. I want to make the mask of the face, the front part of the face, even brighter. Now, it just so happened I made his nose too bright there. Now, what I can do, because I went over it just now, if I press X on the keyboard, notice what happens here. The brush turns from white to black. So basically, I will undo what I've just mistakenly done. So I've got rid of any lighting that I did there. And what I can do, I'll press X again to make it white. I'll go on to the darken, and I will zoom in a little bit. Oops, sorry, I made a mistake there. Darken, 1+. Come down here. I will go over his nose and I will darken it. I'll show you another little trick because there seems to be a little bit of texture gone missing here, but I can rescue that in a little bit. And I can darken his forehead here to make it like an even skin tone across there. I can lighten his eyes. Make sure I'm on the mask. I can lighten his eyes a little bit, not too much. And I'm counting how many strokes I give in the eyes. And that'll do there. And then I can darken the shadier bits, the darker bits. So what we're doing is we're giving more shape. Remember that flat disc that we had, the grey disc? We're giving it more shape. So we're making his muscles pop just that a little bit more, as if they needed it. And also his hand is relatively bright in comparison to his face. So what we would do is darken his hand down just a little bit. Remember, every time I'm clicking on there, it's 10% darker. And we're going to make the muscles a little bit brighter here. So as we're doing it in steps and we're building up, it actually looks like we haven't done that much. But let's have a look. We started off there and we're getting there. So you can see this is the foundation of what we need to do to get here. Obviously, I've given it a bit of toning. I've made it look a little bit sepia because I think it always works well with skin tones, because just normal black and white looks a little bit sterile, a bit cold, a bit 1960s like David Bailey. But I think with a little bit of toning, it can work. And certainly with this kind of image, I think it works exceptionally well. So hopefully that's okay. I think at this point, I'll be more than happy to answer some questions that may have been put in the chat panel. So I'm going to press stop share. Hopefully I can see me. Okay. Right, let's have a look. Oh, crikey, where do we start? Got hello, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Steve, nice to see you.
Apparently there's a Q&A button at the bottom where people can put the Q&As. If you can see it. There's definitely one in there. So
I'm going down to the bottom. How do you say that compares to using curves to achieve similar outcomes? Actually, using curves is also a good way of doing things. There is absolutely no problem with using curves. And by the way, all I'm doing is explaining the way I do things. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's the best. we all tend to get used to a particular way of working. Curves is a good way of doing it. But I've chosen this particular method because I think also with curves, you may, depending on the curve that you put on there, you may overcook it. Whereas with screen and multiply, you cannot go out of range. You can brighten things to a certain point and it won't go too bright. You can darken things to a certain point and it will never go jet black. So that's why I like using screen and multiply layers. It is a bit cumbersome. I know there are other ways of doing it, using a grey middle layer and then dodging and burning on that grey layer. Yes, you can do that as well. And all you have to do is press the Alt button to go from lighten to darken. That's absolutely fine. I'm not here to tell you that this is the only way. It isn't by any means, but it's a way that I found works very, very well. Okay. Phil Andrew, sounds like me, hence why when people say wearing black slims down, it's not always true. Okay. All right. Can't get it to work on my machine. So that's Phil. Okay. Right. So it should work. It's simply 2 layers. I'll happily go over it again and do it really slowly because you can action this yourselves. But as I say, if you would like to make a very small contribution, doesn't matter what it is, I'll happily send you my action for dodging and burning. And I've also got a skin softening action as well that's really, really nice. And obviously way cheaper than a lot of the skin smoothing actions that are out on the market. So what I'll do, I'll go back into Photoshop and I will run through the process of making that action again. So hopefully everyone can get it. If you need to rush for a pen or pencil, feel free. If you want to follow along on your own laptop, go for it. So I'm going to share the screen again. I'll go back onto Photoshop. Here we are again. Okay. So, by the way, for those people who want to create the action themselves, I'll just run through it. Now, I have my actions, which I've got quite a few, in a, I've got it in button view, as it's called. So basically, all I have to do to enable the action, let me just go back onto the other picture, maximize the screen, dump this. Okay, so from the beginning. So what I would normally do, I press the lighten and darken action. So when you're in button mode, you click it once and it runs the action. It's done already, literally not even a second. Okay, but I'll show you how it's done if you want to create an action for yourselves. Hopefully I can remember. So firstly, we come out of button mode. Bear with me. That's it. Okay. You click on that and you uncheck button mode. And then it all appears like this. Okay. So the thing that we want to do is minimize everything by pressing the arrows there. I want to create a new action. So what do? I press plus here. I do believe. Create a new action. So basically, it's like the old-fashioned tape recorders. Once I click that button, everything I do is going to be copied and remembered by Photoshop so I can run it again. So I press this to start it, and then the square on the very end of that panel here, once we've finished, to stop it. So I will press create new action. And I'm going to call it, so I don't confuse it with the other one I have, I'll call it dodge and burn, D and B, screen multiply. Record. And that's going to go, I'll put it into my default actions. So record. So this is what we do. The first thing, create 2 new layers. So it's Command J, Command J. I will call, firstly, I will change the blending mode of this one to multiply. And we can see the effect that multiply creates on the picture straight away. But then I'm going to do an inverted mask. I press the Alt button. and then the Japanese flag, which is the layer mask, and I will name this darken. I will now click on this layer. I will change the blending mode to screen. Again, we can see the effect that screen has on that picture. But then I do another inverted mask. Alt, Japanese flag, there we go. I now press Shift. Oh, sorry, no, I will rename this and I'll call it lighten. I now press Shift and then Command G or Control G on a PC. I group them and I'll call that D and B, dodge and burn, screen, multiply. Return. And now I will stop the recording. So I've just now created an action where I've got both layers, both inverted masks. All I need to do is go into it, click on the mask, obviously not into the picture area because that's going to do weird effects. It's just not what you want. Whenever you're dodging and burning, you click into the inverted mask, press B for brush, a white brush, have the opacity around 10%, and then you can lighten things up. Yeah. And then click into the other window, the other black window, and you can darken things around here and make the shadows a little bit more pronounced. Darken the hands I showed you earlier. So hopefully that's reasonably clear. If there's any more questions, please do let me know. Okay, so I've created the D&B screen multiply. It's there. I can leave it there for a little bit, but I'm going to dump it from this image right now. So hopefully that's okay. Right, so I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to look into the questions, see if there's any more. Hopefully for Phil, Andrew, that you said that you couldn't get it to work on your machine. Please let me know that you've managed to get it going. If not, fire me off an email and I'll try and give you a hand with that later. Okay, so that's dodging and burning. Now, if you remember from the presentation I did earlier, one of the other things I said was keep it simple. And often we take photos and the photos look great in our minds at the time that we're taking them. And then we come home and we open the picture up and we go, oh, why did I leave that in? Why didn't I take that out? Why didn't I crop it differently? Why didn't I include this or exclude that? But we've got the pictures and what are we going to do with them? So this is where the things that I was talking about in the presentation earlier about using our minds and determining what is the most important part of the picture. So what can we do? How can we avoid distractions and that sort of thing? Okay, so again, I'm going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to pick on another picture that I have. I'm going to minimize that, close, and I'm going to close pictures of Jermaine down, don't save, don't save. Okay. So file open. So here's, again, this is another picture. I'm not shy, I'm not scared of showing my raw files. This is a picture that I took a little while ago. And what I want to do, I want to have a little bit of a discussion about this. This is the original raw file. Okay, so I'm just going to open it as it is there. No changes or anything like that. So we went to this event and it was in a stately home, in a library. There's a window to the right-hand side. And I asked the model to sit there. I looked at the surroundings. The couple of things that I noticed were there was this head here behind, pictures on there. There were things on the desk over there, chessboard, light bowl of flowers, a vase of flowers, staircase over here. And I thought from where I was, I had my camera on a tripod, I thought I was square onto the model and the wall behind her. Clearly I wasn't. And I didn't really notice it, but I did want to include her. I had a little bit of wiggle room, so she wasn't right at the very edge of the frame. There was a fair bit of room to play around with, but I wanted the story, I wanted it to be about her. I found a book and I got her to hold it, and I wanted her to be holding it in such a way that she's thinking, melancholy, she's almost crying, dreaming about maybe times past. And that's what I said to her, to get her to have those thoughts in her mind as I was taking the picture. Now, I thought that this guy over here could be what she was thinking about. And maybe the book is about him. So that's what I was thinking of when I took the picture. But then when I started looking at the photo, I started saying to myself, I don't know what I'm looking at. Is it her? Is it the light? Is it the vase? Now, one quick way of working things out is this. If you're not sure where your eye's drawn to, take the picture and turn it upside down. How do you do that? Just press R on your keyboard, and then you'll notice that the cursor turns into a hand with a picture underneath it and an arrow above it. So what you do is you can turn it around. Now, where does our eye go to? Well, to me, the first thing is the light. The second thing is her dress. Then it's a toss-up between her face and that vase. And the floor's a bit busy. So that helped me. So I'm going to press escape now, and it puts it back to where it was. I press M for marquee so I don't rotate it again. So what did I do? There's a few things. I decided that I needed to get rid of this light because it was actually drawing the attention away from the viewer. So how could I do that? I could clone it perhaps. I could crop it. And then I'm looking at the books over here. They're a bit of a distraction. And that picture is grappling for my attention between that little face and there. And there's a chessboard there as well. Do I need that there? So to cut a long story short, I got rid of all those things. I darkened the floor down. I darkened her dress down. I added texture to the dress so that it became a little bit more crunchy, for want of a better word. I lightened her face. And from that, I ended up with, I'll just open the other picture, that. So now, I've also straightened up a little bit the bookshelves in the background. In fact, they're not as straight as they should be. That's what I tried to do. I've given it a slightly different crop. I've added a little bit more, I've left a little bit more space over here because she's looking into this direction. So I lightened her face, darkened the dress, made sure that's still visible but darker, got rid of the things on the table, got rid of the other photo that was there. So the only things that we are really looking at is her face, her hands on the book, the fact that she's thinking of something, thinking of someone, and this little face in the background to add a little bit of mystery. I've darkened the staircase, I've darkened the carpet around here, and I've left a fair degree of light on the dress because I think that's an important part of the picture. It's the styling is actually quite important. And this way, the picture, I think, is far more successful. I've made it simpler. It's a pity I didn't see it at the time, because otherwise I'd have framed it a little bit differently and got exactly what I wanted. But still, because I left enough room around the subject within the original frame that I took, I could play around with it. If I had her too close, it would have made my life much, much more difficult. So hopefully you can see what we've done there. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen to see if there's any questions about this particular image. Okay.
Annie, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
There is a Q&A section. You either got to take your mouse to the top of the page or the bottom of the page, and it should appear, because the questions aren't in chat, they're in Q&A.
Oh, they're not in, right. Okay, good.
So if you, when you open them, just press answer live and it deletes that question and you're off and running.
Okay, so a question from Elizabeth Adams. If you use flow rather than opacity, would it mean that you could blow out the highlights? I'm not sure if that means within the screen and multiply layers. Generally speaking, on the brush, if I go into my, I'll just go into Photoshop very quickly. If I press B for brush. The flow, now generally, that's a good question, yes. Generally, I keep my flow at 100% and I use my opacity at 10%. And the reason for that is the longer you keep your hand on the flow, if you had, for example, 25%, and you keep your brush active for a longer period of time, it creates more and more of a change. I want to be a little bit scientific in the amount of dodging and burning I want to create. I may accidentally have left my brush on a little bit longer with a lower flow rate, and I wouldn't be getting exactly the same. Especially, I mentioned a couple of times about balancing the brightness of the eyes. I don't want to make one eye brighter than the other. I want to keep them the same. So what I do in my workflow, pardon the pun, workflow, I keep the flow at 100% and I change my opacity. So hopefully, Elizabeth, that answers your question. Kim Dixon, what toning did you use on that night to get a nice definition? Hopefully, I've explained that already. The toning, now for black and white, I actually use Nik software. It used to belong to Google, now it belongs to DxO. And I go in there and I can tone it within that. And I usually add a sepia tone, but I tone it down a little bit. But there are many ways of doing toning. I just happen to have got used to Nik software, the Nik Silver Effects 2, I think it is. And it works really, really well for me. Helen Chapman, how would you do this wedding photography? Well, for wedding photography, what I would do, and this is another thing, actually, the picture that I had on the screen a minute ago of the girl in the library, in wedding photography, gentle vignettes work very, very well. I'll show you how I do my vignettes in a second. I'll come back to that in a little bit because it works. I found the way that works best for me, and I'll explain why it works in a second. So Martin Clark asked the question, when you use multiply on a color image, it all goes very saturated. Does this not shift the color when you're burning using this method? The answer is not as much as it would do if you were using dodging and burning. You get minimal color shift, especially if you're using 10% opacity on your brush. Obviously, we want to start off with a picture that isn't, we're not rescuing the picture, we're making it better. So hopefully from the raw file, you will create a PSD or a TIFF that has got enough tonal range for you to play around with. You're not using this particular method to make a picture that you've accidentally or maybe even deliberately underexposed to make it brighter or vice versa. It should be pretty much in the right ballpark. We're just enhancing a picture. Brian White, how does your method of dodge and burn work in areas that are light and dark, such as animal fur? With dodge and burn tools, you have the option of shadows, highlights. How does your method replicate this? Okay, that's a good question. Now, when it comes to dodge and burn animal fur, there are many different ways of doing this. I think my way is best. I would say that, wouldn't I? But really, referring to the questions that I mentioned earlier, with regard to lighten and darken at 10%. If you've got like a black dog, for example, you can certainly up the opacity of your brush to maybe 15 or 20%. On the grayscale that I showed you, you see the overall effect it creates. And to be honest, to understand how blend modes work, it's really, really useful to practice on grayscales like that. And if you email me, or rather, if you ask for the action, whatever, I can send you that grayscale. And you can play around, you can see exactly what each of the blend modes does. It's a real good education. Hopefully that answers your question. Lynn Harper, would you use this technique on a color image? And if so, would you adjust the saturation at the same time? Right, firstly, on a color image, absolutely not. I wouldn't adjust saturation at all. And yes, I definitely do use this technique, the dodging and burning technique, on color images. It works very, very well. But don't forget, like I mentioned earlier, we're not rescuing a picture, we're enhancing a picture. And if, for example, you've got something that's very, very dark, lighting it a lot is actually going to lighten the noise as well. So it's always best, you know, to expose to the right, if you've heard that expression before, ETTR, expose to the right and darken rather than take a picture dark and lighten it. Because by lightening it, you're lightening the noise as well. Whereas if you've got a light picture, you can darken it, providing it's not burnt out. You can darken it and you're actually suppressing the noise. You're making the noise less evident in the picture. Okay, Clive Hall, thank you for the lesson, it's a pleasure. You have a great style with your images. How did you come about it? Oh, geez, Clive, what a question. You know, it's the one thing I've really grappled with regard to style. Other people tell me, I can tell your style a mile off. I know that's taken by you straight away. But when I look at my own work, I go, oh, how can they see my style in my work? Do you know, that comes only after years and years of working in a way that you like, I suppose. That's a real tricky question, but thanks for asking it. Okay, right, Emma, stuck in rotation, can't get back to normal. Escape won't work. Oh, escape should work. Well, if that's the case, go back in your history steps. Just press Command Z a few times if you've got Photoshop. That generally doesn't happen, but hopefully you've got out of that place. Okay, Jane Briscoe Price would love to have a grayscale image. My pleasure, I'll send it to you later. Okay, hopefully that's answered all the questions that I've got there. I haven't clicked them as answered. Maybe that's something I could do, but I can see dismissed. So I've answered that live. Yeah, okay. Answered that one, Okay, sorry, I'm sounding very boring now, but I'm just doing a bit of housekeeping in the Q&A box. Clive, oh, done that. Emma, help, I'm stuck in rotation. Oh, bless you. Okay, the grayscale, thanks. Keeping us all interested in improving. They're very good. Okay, so we've done that one as well. So we've answered all those questions. Okay, hopefully, there was something else I was going to say. What was it? Oh yeah, vignetting. Okay, I'll go into vignetting. Okay, I'll bring up another picture, actually. Yeah, I'll bring up another picture. So, am I still there? I'm still here, yes. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Go into Photoshop. Okay, full screen. Here we go. File open. So this is the last picture I've got. Tia. Okay. This is the raw file. We'll do a quick discussion on this as well. Okay, this is a good one. Okay. So this is a daylight shot. I've got in my studio, I could turn the camera around and show you my studio, but I won't now, I'll do it another time. In the studio, I've got a patio door, and I position my subjects by the patio door. The light comes across their face absolutely gloriously. The problem I always have is this bit of white wall over here. So again, I'm going to open the image, okay, because that's a raw file. There it is. Make it a bit smaller. Half a rotate. I'm going to spin it around. Okay. Where does our eye go to? The big white area on the right-hand side. And the subject's completely secondary. I'm pressing escape. It's there. M for marquee gets me out of that. So what do I do to this? I want the emphasis to be where? I want it on the little girl's face. I absolutely adore her expression. So what can I do to get rid of the white area? Well, the wall behind her, actually, that's a door. That's a melamine door. What I'm going to do, oops, the daisy, I'm going to go onto a rectangular marquee tool, click on a big bit of grey area, copy, paste, transform, move it across, blend mode, darken. And then I'll drop the opacity until it sort of blends in. There, up a little bit higher. I want the colour to be, it's about there. Okay. Then what I can do, I can go onto my Japanese flag. B for brush, black brush. This time 100%. And I will, okay. I'll blend the edge. Not done particularly well, but hey ho. I'm going to press transform and pull it across a little bit. Okay. That's roughly there. Okay, if I had time, I'd do it. I'm going to flatten that layer. Now, what are the good things and what are the bad things about this image? Firstly, I can't stand the specks she's got on her shirt. I think they're a distraction. And the surrounding area is a little bit light in comparison to the way I envision the picture in my mind. So what can I do? I can go across all of these things and get rid of them. I can then darken it around the outside, which will bring more emphasis onto my subject. So in actual fact, I'm going to do something else. Very, very unethical. Press patch tool. By the way, if you ever come to me for training, oops, no, in fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. Do one little bit at a time. I'm just patching it to get rid of that horrible line. Just for the sake of speed. There we go, not too bad. Okay, now what I would do in this case is I would vignette it. Now, how do people vignette? This is the way I do it. I go to filter, camera raw filter. Okay, so if you look at the little thing at the side there, it says Shift Command A. So I've got used to it, I've done it so many times. I do Command Shift A, takes me straight, Command Shift A, takes me straight into camera raw filter. Make the picture a bit smaller. Now, one quick tip about the vignette tool, or vignetting images in general. It's always easier to see if there's an obvious vignette when the picture's smaller, when it's a thumbnail. Yeah. So what you do is you go onto the radial filter. Now, a lot of people struggle with banding. Now, I work on a 16-bit file. A 16-bit file, if you vignette it, doesn't give you banding. Now, it doesn't mean take an 8-bit file, convert it to 16-bit, and then go back to 8-bit, because that's absolute rubbish. You've got to start off with an 8-bit file, and it gives you the smoothest of smooth vignettes without banding. Okay, so what we do, we click on the radial filter, and we go to exposure. I usually say 2 stops. And then we can move it around, and we can see the effect of the vignette as we move it. We can make it bigger. I can rotate it, yeah, which is something that isn't that easy in other ways of doing it. Okay, I want to make sure that the light is on her face, not on her dress, not on her top, her face. So there we go. I would have that there. And I say, okay. Now, if we look at this, now I've overdone it on her dress. What can I do? We go to our Japanese flag. B for brush, black brush. But this time, I'm not going to give it 100%. I'm going to drop it to about 25% or thereabouts. I'm going to have a big brush. Okay, you can see the brush there, just about. Hopefully you can see it on the screens. And I'm going to lighten her top ever so slightly. It's still darker than her face. I just want to make sure there's none of it on her face. You can see the effect there. Yeah, that's what I've done. I've just turned the background layer off. You can see where I've done it. Now, I want to make sure there's absolutely no vignette on her face. So what I can do, I can push the brush up to 100%. I can go over her face, and I can ensure there's absolutely no effect on her face. So look at the way our eyes are squeezed away from the outside edges and focus on her face just by turning the vignette on and off. Look at the way our eyes delve into the corners of the image. As soon as we do that, bang, we've got more impact. We're looking straight at her face. So, with this picture, as I explained earlier, I lightened the wall on the left-hand side. I got rid of the spots on her top. I thought that the picture would work better in black and white, and the picture I ended up with was this. Maybe I've overdone it a little bit on the face, but certainly our attention goes straight to her face, straight to her eyes, straight to her expression. We don't even look at her shirt because there's no spots on it anymore. What a difference it makes. Looking at this picture now, I'd probably darken her face ever so slightly because it looks a little bit light, a little bit too light to me now. So hopefully you've got something out of that. That's probably where we want to be at this point in time. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed it, had a good time, picked up a couple of tips, and hopefully with this, you can add more power to your portraits. So I'm going to stop the share and over to Steve. Oh, just a minute. I'm just going to go into Q&A one more time. Okay, sorted rotation issues. Thank you very much. Well done, Emma. Okay. And Martin Clark, on a sparkly material, how do you keep it sparkly without the highlights dominating or being dinged blown? Oh, that's a really good question. Oh, that's a bit of a long answer to that one, Martin. I had a picture that I submitted for a fellowship panel recently where I was using a sparkly material with sequins all over it, and they were getting blown. And what I ended up doing was copying and pasting sequins from a darker area of the dress to darken them down. I'd really like to see the image. To be honest, what I would do is darken the picture down probably considerable amount, create a new layer with a darker image on it, invert the mask, and then brush in the areas that I wanted to darken, depending on if they were completely blown or not. Otherwise, add a bit of texture to them that's darker, and then allow the blend mode or the opacity to be at the right level so you've got some detail in the brighter bits. Hopefully, that's it. Thank you very, very much for joining, and I'll be more than happy to send people that want to the action if they would like to, or we can do something to sort you out. Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pani. That was absolutely excellent. There was so much information there, it was untrue. Can I ask people to try and support our speakers with their GoFundMe pages? I'm sure they don't like to ask, but when they're giving time and information and knowledge like they are, and Pani has today, if you can, go on there. Anybody that makes a donation on that page is going to get his action. He's a generous sort of person, but please just give a little bit of something because we're hoping to keep this going, and this is a great way of doing it. Tomorrow in the morning, we have got Joe Bradley, and then Gavin Presti's on Thursday in the afternoon. And I'm sure they're going to be great as well. Pani, all I want to do is thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Really good presentation, and the stuff you did afterward was excellent as well. So thank you, and I will close the meeting.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.